From the very beginning of our marriage, a shadow of misunderstanding lay between me and my husband's family. His parents, always restrainedly cold and a little distant, made me the target of caustic criticism from the very beginning. Their words were razor sharp, especially when it came to the most painful thing for me, the inability to give them grandchildren. Their stern gaze pushed me to a difficult conclusion. For them, it seemed, I had become a kind of obstacle, a barrier in the way of their family ideal. Every day, the hidden annoyance that became the background of my marriage became more and more obvious in their eyes. But the hardest blow came from where I wasn't expecting it. My husband, Peter, who, as it seemed to me, should have stood by, protecting me from these injections, instead unexpectedly expressed regret. He said he was jealous of his brother, and then, almost casually, mentioned that my daughter-in-law was young, beautiful and, unlike me, had already become a mother. These words, like sharp shards of glass, pierced my heart, leaving me with a feeling of unbearable resentment and disappointment. But things got even worse when my mother-in-law, unhappy with my inability to give birth, began spreading crazy accusations, claiming that I had allegedly cheated on Peter. Without batting an eye, she stated that she even had evidence, footage from some hidden camera, which, according to her, incriminated me in this alleged betrayal. These slanderous speeches were the last straw. At that moment, I decided that I would not remain silent. I've come up with a plan. Summoning all my strength, I organized a family meeting, disguising it as a birthday celebration for my nephew, to which I invited everyone I wanted to see at this evening's court. With an unbiased expression on my face, I turned to my mother-in-law with an offer to finally look at the very evidence that she had so often talked about. The eyes of all those present turned to me, confused, wary, and some even with a note of pleasure, anticipating a scandal. However, 2 weeks after our forced family meeting, which seemed to put an end to the scandal, a call came from an unknown number on Sunday evening. I ignored it, thinking it was just spam. But the next day, as soon as I left work, the call was repeated, and so it went on day after day, each time 15 minutes after the end of the working day. It was as if my phone had become a clock, counting down alarm signals. Each call felt like a blow to the taut string of my patience, and eventually the irritation reached its peak. I was about to block the number when I suddenly changed my mind and, with a little hesitation, answered to put an end to this mystery. A slightly confused but recognizable voice was heard on the other end of the line. It was Peter, the guy I met at the dating event. His voice sounded delighted, but also a little confused. He exclaimed, "Oh, Emma, finally. I'm so glad you answered." Thoughts instantly flashed through my head about how he managed to find out my number, because I definitely did not give him my contact details. When I asked him how he got it, he laughed and admitted with casual directness that he had turned to our mutual acquaintance, a friend with whom I had come to this event. It turned out that this friend could not resist and gave him my number, seeing that Peter showed such restless persistence. In addition, a friend found sympathy in Peter's company, and soon they began dating, so, apparently, the issue became a matter of time. A slight dissatisfaction flashed inside me. It was strange to realize that my friend had revealed my data so easily. Nevertheless, I felt strangely excited, because Peter, who had put so much effort into getting a random phone number, showed an unexpected persistence that touched me in its own way. That's how we started dating. With each meeting, I felt more and more that in his presence I found something close to peace, which I always lacked in a turbulent world. Our relationship was not a passionate affair, but there was something tender and infinitely warm about it. Peter, with his gentle and patient nature, seemed like the kind of safe haven I didn't know I needed for a long time. A year later, he proposed to me, and I accepted him without hesitation. I was sure that with him I could live the peaceful life I had always dreamed of. By that time, my parents had been living apart for a long time. Their relationship, which had slipped into indifference, was like background noise for me, which did not cause much pain. The separation of my parents became indifferent to me even during college, where, to be honest, I felt further and further away from them. My connections with my family have long been rare and purely formal, although they supported me financially while I was studying. My parents, not being present at the ceremony itself, nevertheless made their contribution by sending us a generous sum of money as a wedding gift. It was more than enough for me to feel that they were supporting me, despite the distance and lack of a close relationship. However, my cousins, Rachel and Brian, did not share my calm attitude. They, with bitterness on their face and in their words, insisted that their parents were trying to make up for their coldness and emotional indifference with money, which they considered real hypocrisy. For them, it was akin to if they decided to buy their daughter's forgiveness or arrange her happiness with banknotes. The words of Rapper and Brian tormented me, awakening doubts. But Peter suddenly stood up for me, saying what seemed to be gathered from all those thoughts that I was afraid to voice. It's funny how people condemn other people's money, especially those who have never worked a day, he snapped. Your father knows how difficult it is to earn money, let him appreciate at least that. This short but sincere defense warmed me up and gave me the feeling that I had made the right choice by entrusting my life to this man. Peter was the one who could support me, who saw the situation from the other side, protecting me from unnecessary worries. At that moment, I really felt happy and confident that we could overcome all the difficulties. But, alas, about 6 years after the wedding, everything began to crumble. There have been long-awaited changes in my life. I have been promoted. I plunged into my work, seeking recognition, worked tirelessly on new projects, and soon successfully passed the exam for promotion. The bosses noted my enthusiasm, and I was offered to work in the international business division of the company, expand my experience and gain new skills. Full of joy, I hurried home to share this news with Peter, believing that he would share my excitement. However, his reaction was an icy shower for me. He frowned, and barely concealed annoyance flashed in his eyes. So you're saying that you've climbed to the top now, right? And now you're the big shot, he said with a bitterness and harshness I'd never heard before. A painful perplexity arose inside me. What did I say wrong? Trying to defuse the situation, I quickly apologized, explaining that I did not mean anything like that. But it only inflamed him even more. Of course, you're playing the role of a victim, only confirming that you're looking down on me, he snapped, and before I could respond, he slammed the door of the trash can shut, throwing his cigarette into it, and slamming the door, left the apartment. Since then, a weary week of silence and suspense has begun. Peter didn't answer my calls, didn't read my messages. All I knew was that he was still showing up at work, so at least I didn't have to worry about his safety. Once I even thought about waiting for him at the office to try to talk to him, but something inside me held me back. Afraid that my presence would irritate or embarrass him, I decided to wait. Finding no other way out, I headed to my father-in-law's and mother-in-law's house, hoping that talking to them would help shed light on Peter's behavior and perhaps soften our relationship a little. I understood that their accusations were inevitable, that instead of supporting me, reproaches and discontent were most likely waiting for me, but what else could I do? It may have been a risky move, but it seemed to me the only possible one. They let me in without any questions, although my appearance was unexpected. When I entered the living room, the first thing I saw was Peter's angry gaze, burning with a cold flame of resentment. He rose abruptly from his chair, as if on a spring, and his voice cut through the silence of the room like a knife. "What are you doing here?" he shouted, clenching his fists. "Did you come all this way to humiliate me again?" His words were like a punch in the gut. I hastily replied that I had not intended to hurt his feelings and that if I had caused any misunderstanding, I sincerely apologized. But Peter didn't seem to hear me. As soon as I opened my mouth, his parents, as if on cue, joined in his angry monologue. Their words, soaked in the poison of resentment, sounded peremptory, as if they were sure of my guilt in advance. "The fact that you both work does not give you the right to behave arrogantly," declared the father-in-law. "Don't you understand that a wife should know her place? That's why we were against this marriage from the very beginning. Rachel, my mother-in-law, with her usual stern tone, joined in this accusatory chorus, furiously reproaching me for hurting her son's ego. Do you think your career can replace your family? She screamed, waving her arms. Their speeches came crashing down on me like an avalanche, blocking any attempts I made to explain myself. They did not want to hear my point of view. It seemed that they only needed my submission, my willingness to submit to their will. Finally, after much accusation, the mother-in-law pronounced a seemingly final verdict. Peter does not want to return to your apartment. If you don't intend to get a divorce, get out of there and move here, live with us. We will teach you how to be a real wife. At that moment, my confidence cracked, and although a voice in the back of my mind told me that divorce could be the only reasonable way out, I still couldn't make up my mind. I still loved Peter, and watching my parents' marriage as a child, I used to think that family requires patience, even if sometimes you have to make sacrifices. Not realizing the seriousness of my choice, I agreed to Rachel's proposal and moved in with them. My father-in-law and mother-in-law were pleased with this decision, and I soon realized the true reason for their joy. It turned out that Charles, Peter's older brother, who always had a special place in their hearts, lived with his parents until recently, just 4 months ago, he met a girl and moved out to start his life separately. Rachel, who adored Charles and apparently saw him as the perfect son, seemed especially proud of him. Charles, Peter's older brother, was the subject of Rachel's undisguised admiration. He graduated from a more prestigious university and always stood out for his brilliant resume and confident career. His departure was a real blow to Rachel, not only emotionally, but also financially. With Charles's departure, the house lost a significant part of the income that my relatives had already become accustomed to. Their vanity and predilection for ostentatious luxury required funds. The father-in-law and mother-in-law liked to arrange family gatherings, setting the tables with expensive treats and wine that emphasized their status. Peter, who has always felt in the shadow of a successful older brother, finally received the long-awaited attention of his parents. They almost convinced him that moving into their house was a sign of his strength and responsibility. It seemed to me that, watching this, I began to see the situation with extraordinary clarity. My husband, absorbed in the new attention, finally felt valuable and needed. However, things got complicated when Charles married his young and charming sweetheart Judy. She was several years younger than Peter and me and gave the impression of a fragile, quiet nature that evoked protective instincts in everyone. Each of her visits, as it soon became apparent, worried not only Brian, but also Peter. They began to fuss around her, trying to please, as if her fragility required constant care from them. This displeased Rachel, who repeatedly accused me of a lack of charm, claiming that Peter would not have shown such interest in Judy if I could have been more attractive to him. Every day her taunts and reproaches became more and more derogatory. One day, unable to stand it, she bluntly stated that I should quit my job and focus on pregnancy. Her desire to finally see her grandson became an obsession. She insisted that this would solve our family problems, because only a child is supposedly able to strengthen the marriage and return Peter to a normal life. But Rachel's idealism was deaf to reality. The financial situation has become threatening. I tried to carefully discuss this issue by collecting data and showing reports generated from budget management software to explain that family expenses far exceed our income, especially considering the extravagant habits maintained for many years thanks to Charles's help. However, all my efforts to explain the situation turned into another reproach. You just don't know how to manage money. Constant excuses. The situation escalated even more when Judy had her first child, little Andrew. Suddenly, Rachel, who had previously treated Judy coldly, became not only tolerant, but even adored her, as if she had always seen her as a worthy wife for her eldest son. She turned into a devoted grandmother, tirelessly repeating how lucky she was that she could finally enjoy her long-awaited grandson. Rachel began to look forward to the arrival of Charles and Judy, whom she had previously met with hidden irritation. Now she was excitedly telling how wonderful it would be if Charles's family could live under the same roof with them so that they could see Andrew every day. And then, as if casually, caustic remarks about me began to appear in her words. Well, Judy is young and beautiful, and most importantly, she gave Charles a baby right after the wedding, Rachel threw at me one day over dinner. I envy my daughter-in-law because she knows how to become a mother, she thought, and there was a special, heavy irony in her voice. Brian, who was sitting nearby, did not fail to intervene, as if he had only been waiting for this moment. Maybe we should just kick out the daughter-in-law, who can't have children, and invite Charles's family to live here instead of her, he suggested without a shadow of doubt, his gaze burning with almost painful interest in my silence. These words, like a heavy tread, left a deep mark on my heart. I couldn't help but think that maybe it would really be better to leave Peter and this house, which seemed to have no place for me and my feelings for a long time. As if to confirm these thoughts, it soon became known that Judy was expecting her second child. Rachel's obsession with grandchildren has reached its peak. Now her attention to her younger sister-in-law and caustic ridicule of me have become a permanent part of family life. But this time her attacks took on a sinister tone. One evening she started a strange conversation in which she made a ridiculous accusation. According to her theory, I probably cannot have children not because of nature, but because I am having an affair on the side, and I am afraid that the child may not be from Peter, but from my imaginary lover. Her words shocked me so much that I couldn't find the strength to respond. I silently left the room, deciding that the best solution in this situation was to simply ignore her meaningless speculation. But soon events took an unexpected turn. One evening I noticed a pleased, almost triumphant grin on Rachel's face. My heart skipped a beat with a premonition of trouble, and I decided to ask what was going on. She didn't shirk. Her response was full of ominous complacency. "I knew you were having an affair," she said proudly. "And I have proof. I hired a professional to install a hidden camera, a reliable source that confirms my suspicions." Then she burst out laughing, sounding so confident that for a moment she shocked even Brian and Peter. They were silent, but suspicion flashed in their eyes, reinforced by Rachel's confidence. And at that moment, as if under her influence, they said that if it turned out to be true, it would be a reason for divorce. Sighing, I answered calmly, as if I had already decided for myself a long time, "Well, then let's do this. We have a birthday celebration planned for Andrew next week. I will take this opportunity to tell all the relatives about what is happening. Let everyone see the evidence that you are so eager to demonstrate." Rachel, as usual, turned Andrew's birthday celebration into a grand event filled with luxury and splendor. The banquet hall and the hotel had been reserved in advance, and everything sparkled with ostentatious pomp. Relatives, wearily whispering, retold familiar stories about Rachel's vanity, but no one refused the delicious treats and drinks offered. Everything went on as usual until I walked up to the stage and took the microphone, attracting the eyes of everyone present. Surprise and tension spread through the room, and Rachel and Peter, like the others, stopped their conversations and exchanged glances. "I'm sorry to interrupt your evening, but I have an important announcement for everyone who is gathered here today," I began, and a wary silence reigned in the room. The faces of my relatives, especially Rachel and Peter, broke into grins, as if they were sure that I was going to announce our divorce. However, on my signal, the staff dimmed the lights, and the screen lowered behind me attracted everyone's attention. At the moment when the video started playing, footage of an evening hotel hidden in the shade of trees appeared on the screen. The camera zoomed in on the main entrance of the hotel until one particular entrance took up the entire focus. Peter, Brian, and Judy turned pale as soon as they recognized the place, and I noticed their faces slowly losing confidence. Unlike them, Rachel, still not understanding what would happen next, continued to watch with lively curiosity, ignoring the growing tension in the hall. Suddenly, the camera captured a clear shot, from which the guests burst into great surprise. On the screen, a slightly shaky image showed Judy leaving the hotel and hugging Brian, after which they kissed passionately before getting into a taxi. The room froze in silence. Then, when the scene on the screen changed to the same hotel, Peter appeared in the frame, carefully holding the hand of the same Judy, and, as if not noticing anything around him, he kissed her with such tenderness that now whispers and whispers engulfed the room. I stopped the video, turned up the light and picked up the microphone again, allowing the spectacle to gradually cool down, like icy water hitting hot metal. My announcement to all of you is exactly what you just saw. My husband Peter and my brother-in-law Brian were both in a relationship with Judy, Charles's wife. These words reverberated like thunder through the hall, leaving everyone stunned, and shadows of undisguised horror froze on the faces of Rachel, Peter, and Brian. The noise of discontent and bewilderment rose in the hall, but quickly faded when I lifted into the air a thick folder with reports and documents that originated from the very investigative company hired by Rachel. The eyes of the relatives darted between me and Peter's family, and I took advantage of the moment to develop my thought. This evidence, I began, holding up a folder of papers, was not collected and recorded in order to reveal the true betrayal of Brian, Peter, and Judy. Rachel had no other intention than to prove that I was having an affair in order to find an excuse for my exile. Peter probably fueled her suspicions himself and made her believe in the ridiculous rumors about my infidelity. At my words, a lot of looks turned to Rachel and Peter, full of condemnation and disbelief. They did not understand how easily empty accusations could turn against them. However, Rachel, without checking the true content of the reports, proudly announced her victory to everyone as soon as the investigative company sent her evidence that a criminal moment was recorded on the camera. Unfortunately, for her, the investigation turned out to be a real disaster. I continued, looking down at the shocked Rachel and slowly projecting the photo onto the screen. There was silence in the hall when the guests saw an image from the maternity hospital, capturing the moment when Judy held the newborn Andrew in her arms. In the photo, Charles was standing next to me, smiling broadly, and Peter and I were a little apart, celebrating the joyful event. Rachel, who disliked me, felt that a blurry photo, probably taken in a hurry, would be something that might be suitable for her accusations. As you can see, I said, looking coldly at Rachel, this photo went to the investigative company hired by her, asking her to find any evidence that would point to my alleged infidelity. Rachel looked like she was frozen to the bone, and I saw that I had hit right on target. Without hastily checking the photo, the investigative company made a catastrophic mistake. They mistook Judy for the daughter-in-law they were supposed to investigate, and, thinking that Charles was the husband under suspicion, they began to follow her. They quickly discovered how Judy repeatedly visits the hotel not only with Brian, but also with Peter. Rachel hadn't fully realized how badly she'd miscalculated, and I was holding back a shudder of relief and strange triumph. Rachel, in her impatient quest to find evidence of my alleged infidelity, mistakenly decided that she had finally discovered what she had been looking for a long time. When I first came across that evidence provided to her, I experienced mixed feelings, bewilderment, bitterness, and at the same time barely restrained irritation. But then something clicked in me. I remembered the name of the investigative company that flashed across the family credit card statement that Rachel used. Her habit of spending too much led to the fact that she persuaded me to let her use the family card when the limit on her personal card was exhausted. To avoid unexpected large purchases, I set up notifications in the app that allow me to track expenses every month. It was thanks to this that I noticed the expenses that she directed to pay for the investigation. The next day, I took a half-day vacation and headed to the office of the investigative company. I politely explained to them that an incorrect investigation had been conducted as a result of a misunderstanding and that an adjustment was required. The company accepted my request and quickly provided the results, collected professionally and with care. It is precisely this evidence, obtained during the reinvestigation, that I presented today. When the screen was raised and the light filled the room again, there was an indescribable shock on the faces of Judy, Brian, and Peter. They were pale and terrified, and did not even dare to look at each other. Trying to keep as calm as possible, I went up to my great-aunt and uncle, an elderly couple who were respected by the whole family, and quietly asked them to arrange for the children to be taken to another room. There was a tense stir in the hall when they immediately complied with my request. Judy, without looking up, handed Andrew over to the relatives, who took him along with the other children. The hall was again plunged into silence, broken only by quiet whispers. Only the adults remained in the room, and their faces were full of indignation and condemnation. Rachel, trembling with anger and humiliation, turned abruptly to Judy. There was a mixture of rage and pain on her face as she abruptly rushed forward and screamed, "How could you? You betrayed both me and Charles. How could you contact Brian and Peter?" Her words sounded like a bolt from the blue, and there were gasps in the hall. The relatives standing closer to Rachel tried to hold her back, but she was rushing forward, furiously rushing towards Judy. Several people jumped up to stop her, holding her hands and not allowing her to approach the petrified Judy. Brian and Peter, pale and stunned, stood motionless, not knowing what to do. I decided to strike the final blow, ending this evening once and for all. Gathering my strength, I announced that I intended to divorce Peter in order to free myself from this difficult marriage. I looked into the hall full of disappointed and angry faces and calmly said, "I apologize for the inconvenience caused to everyone here. According to the investigative company, this unacceptable relationship between Peter, Brian, and Judy has been going on for a long time. Reconciliation is out of the question." After pausing, I stumbled as if by accident. Then, turning to the guests, I added, "It's hard for me to think that Andrew and the child Judy is currently carrying could be Brian's or even Peter's children." These words caused an instant storm, sighs, whispers, and even condemning glances directed at the men. There was movement in the room. Several women came up to me, supporting me, comforting me, and sympathetically taking my hands. The others began to sharply condemn Peter and Brian. They were accused of immorality, treason, and shamelessness. In the cold, condemning silence they stood, speechless and devoid of answers, surrounded by disdain and contempt. Rachel couldn't help herself and continued to scold Judy loudly, accusing her of betrayal and of destroying her trust and family. She rushed at Judy, but was restrained by several relatives, while Judy stood petrified under the weight of the consequences of my revelations. After this event, rumors spread with stunning speed, and soon the whole truth came to Charles that his wife had cheated on him with her own brother and even with his father. He was in shock and couldn't believe what had happened for a long time. However, when the first numbness passed, his thoughts turned to the most painful thing, the question of whether Andrew and the child Judy was carrying were his children. His mind was filled with heavy doubts, even though Judy was desperately trying to convince him that the children were really his. But, as often happens, once the seed of doubt has been sown, there is no getting rid of it. Taking advantage of a moment when Judy was confused, Charles ordered a paternity kit to find out the truth. After receiving the test results, he found that his suspicions were confirmed. Andrew and the unborn child were not his children. Even after the results were presented, Judy stubbornly continued to deny her guilt, which only irritated and upset Charles even more. Broken by this betrayal, he contacted Judy's parents to inform them of what had happened. They came to my office, shocked and humiliated, demanding an explanation, unable to believe the terrible story that Charles had told them. Despite their harshness, I understood that the situation needed to be clarified, and I took the day off the next day to meet with them at the law firm with which I had already collaborated. When we got to the office, the lawyer, Richard, spread out the documents in front of them and, turning on the infamous video, allowed them to see all the evidence for themselves, that they had no doubts. Judy's parents, having seen the footage from the video and the revealing documents, were speechless. Their faces were pale, like masks frozen in mute horror and shame. At this time, Charles, not hiding his triumph, said, "Well, now do you see? I told you, she betrayed me, cheating on both her brother and her father." Neither Andrew nor the child she is carrying has anything to do with me." However, his triumph was abruptly interrupted by Richard's voice. "I'm sorry, but let's get back to the business we're here for. The issue is not about paternity, but alimony," he said firmly, as if reminding that this meeting was supposed to be strictly formal. His neutral, unwavering tone made it clear that he was not supporting either side. But most of all, I was struck by the reaction of Judy herself and her parents. Judy seemed ready to fight to the end, and, casting a dismissive glance at Charles, mockingly declared, "It's all your fault, Charles. Peter cheated on you because you're too busy working to be even a little attractive. You deserve it yourself." I answered quietly, keeping calm, "In that case, I think it would be fair if the court decides who is right. Perhaps a third party will look at it differently." As soon as I mentioned the trial, Judy's parents turned even paler. They had a lot to lose. They were respected teachers at a prestigious girls' school, and their family's reputation had to match their position. The ideal of a decent wife and mother, which they diligently maintained, threatened to collapse along with their family honor. The words "trial" made Judy's parents desperate to avoid publicity. They immediately began to beg for forgiveness and offered to resolve the matter peacefully. But at this stage, their apologies meant little to me. I glanced at Richard and stood up, making it clear that the meeting was over. Richard later informed me that after I left, a scandal broke out between Judy, her parents, and Charles, accompanied by violent altercation and tears, and it all ended with Richard being forced to threaten to call the police to leave the office. Soon after, perhaps to prevent further publicity, Judy's parents transferred a significant amount of money through Richard. However, at that time my attention was far from the fate of Charles and Judy. Shortly after these events, I learned about a new twist involving my own relatives. Peter, who seemed determined to jump at any opportunity, demanded a division of the property, assuring me that he had the right to do so. Charles, after a severe shock, filed for divorce and categorically refused to pay alimony for the maintenance of Andrew and the unborn child, unless DNA tests confirm his paternity. Moreover, he stated that he intends to officially renounce paternity as soon as the child is born. Judy's shocked parents, against her will, insisted on a perinatal test. His results were the final blow to the remnants of their family. It turned out that the father of the unborn child was not Charles, but Peter, and even more shocking was that Andrew's biological father turned out to be Brian. The situation has become absolutely catastrophic. Upon learning that her husband was the father of her grandson, Rachel experienced a mental breakdown. She quickly aged and became almost unrecognizable. Her face, once filled with stern strength, acquired an expression of emptiness and fatigue. Brian, under pressure and the weight of what he had done, was forced to take care of his mother, now accompanying her everywhere like a shadow. In a conversation with his father, he once bitterly said, "I'm not going to take care of you in your old age. Let Peter do it." However, by that time, the family's savings had already been almost completely exhausted. Almost all of Brian's retirement savings went into lavish gifts and jewelry for Judy in a vain attempt to win her over. Their financial independence collapsed as rapidly as their reputation. Charles's family disowned Rachel and Brian, and in desperation they turned to Peter, but he was unable to help either. Burdened by my demands for the division of property and Judy's claims, he was finally crushed. Judy, who was now left with nothing after her divorce from Charles, persistently demanded marriage from Peter, arguing that he was obliged to take responsibility for her and the unborn child. In a desperate attempt to hold on, Peter turned to me, asking for forgiveness and begging for a second chance, but his words were devoid of real feelings. I knew that he was only looking for financial support, hoping that I would take care of his parents. By this point, I had no feelings left for Peter other than cold indifference. I instructed Richard to inform him of my final decision, blocked all communication channels with him, leaving only one social media platform in case legal issues arise. Our divorce was finalized, and despite numerous debates and delays, the division of the estate was paid in full, albeit in two parts. According to Richard, Judy was now living with Peter's relatives, as if claiming to be his wife, even though there was no official marriage. She maintained the illusion of a family, hoping that eventually she would be able to return to the life she had destroyed. Rumors of Peter and Judy's family drama spread throughout the neighborhood, flooding the local community with the family story, which has now become known as Shameless. Gradually, they became known even outside the city. Visiting relatives, who heard snatches of conversations, made the retellings even more scandalous, and neighbors, condemning the endless intrigues, began to avoid any communication with this family. Judy, drowning in shame, hardly left the house and gradually became a recluse, showing no interest in caring for Rachel, nor caring for little Andrew and the newborn, who already needed close attention. Soon even Judy's parents, unable to stand the humiliation, took custody of the children, but at the same time finally disowned their daughter, saying, "You are no longer our daughter, and we are not your parents. Don't ever show us your face again." Left without support and with nowhere to go, Judy was completely dependent on Peter, as were my former relatives, for whom his income became the only source of livelihood. Now his funds were forced to cover the expenses of 4 adults, including his mother, Rachel, who needed constant care after a mental breakdown. The situation was further complicated by the fact that the story spread throughout the company where Peter worked. One of my colleagues from the subsidiary mentioned at a casual meeting that he heard funny stories about how a distant relative working in the branch was happy to convey the events of a family scandal in colors. As a result, Peter found himself at the center of derogatory rumors and even on the pages of gossip sites. Under the pressure of this situation and the inability to leave due to financial obligations, he had to endure everything while continuing to work. Charles seemed to see the victims and injustice in what was happening, but he could not overcome his arrogant attitude. He looked down not only on Judy and his relatives, but also on me as a woman unable to have children, which in his eyes became a confirmation of my failure. I avoided him at work, distancing myself from him and from society, which succumbed to whispers and suspicions. However, the situation soon became unbearable for him. Unable to cope with the constant conversations behind his back, he voluntarily agreed to transfer to a regional branch of the company, distancing himself from everything that connected him with the past. And so, when everything seemed to have come to a relative balance, my superiors made me an unexpected offer to transfer to a foreign branch to take on a major project, fully entrusting me with all the powers. I was taken by surprise by this offer, although during the interview I mentioned my willingness to work abroad. My successes in the company, skills, and hard work were noticed and encouraged, and now a completely new road opened up in front of me. I felt it was time to take this bold step and accept the challenge abroad. Peter, having heard about my plans through mutual acquaintances, sent me a series of romantic messages to the only account on the social network that I had not blocked. In them, he asked for a second chance, reminding me of the past and promising to change, but I could no longer take him seriously. I realized that his messages were nothing more than a plea for support, both financial and emotional, so that someone would take on the burden of his life's difficulties. With a sigh of relief, I decided to leave these messages unanswered. Soon I will close all remaining connections, disconnect the phone, and finally fly out into a new life. Breaking with the past turned out to be a success for me, and I feel ready to face any difficulties that lie ahead. The path seems bold, but conscious. Now I intend to focus on my career, allowing myself to remain positive and full of energy for everything that the future holds in store for me.